25, verses 14 and 30. The parable of the talents. Jesus said, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who received the 5 talents went out at once to put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also one of the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went on, dug a hole in the ground, and hid the master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with him. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Mister, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your mother's happiness, or your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting whether you have not sown and gathered where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here it is, what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. Shall you know that I harvested where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So, we are coming to the end of the lectionary year, and so we, in our gospel reading, we have the reading of Jesus' final time here on earth. And he's been giving his disciples final instructions for when he will no longer be with them, and telling them that he will return. And it's been about the end times. Time is a funny thing. Never enough. There never seems to be enough of it. We have all kinds of time-saving devices, but it seems like we don't have any more time. And the concept of time changes. When you are young and waiting for something, time seems to pass so slowly. My dad, when I was a kid, would say, boy, the older you get, the faster time goes. I didn't understand that then, but I certainly understand it now. Because time seems to be zipping by. It seems like we're ready for Christmas again. Seems like we just finished it. And I imagine sometimes when our children are young, we wish that they'd hurry up and grow up. once they had grown up and left home, we wished we had more time with them because it seems like we missed so much. They're gone in a blink of an eye. And someone said as we go about our lives, we don't realize how much each day counts until we have no more days to count. Have you ever heard of the coffee can theory of lifetime? When you open a new can of coffee, we tend to use a generous amount because if we have a full can, but about the halfway through, we get a little more conservative. And by the time we get to the bottom, we're measuring very carefully and even straight to the bottom of the can. Don't we treat our time the same way? When we're young, we're careless about how we spend our time because we have our entire lives ahead of us. But somewhere in the middle years, we begin to realize that we're not going to live forever, and so we begin to reevaluate our priorities. And by the time you reach the age that I am, you wonder where's all that time going? But even more importantly, and the question of where did time go, is what have I done with that time that is gone? In many ways, this is a puzzling parable. It's puzzling for me in one way, because it seems like that God is an angry, punishing God. Because we know that the master represents God. And he casts that poor servant out into the darkness. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth. But the God I serve is a loving God. I don't think he would cause me harm. So that's kind of difficult to square at times. And then some people will tell you that the talents represent all the gifts that we've been given. And it's all about using the gifts to work for God. And basically, everyone has something to do that they can do for God. And we either use it or lose it. It's also been used for stewardship campaigns. And contrary to what might be preached from some best-selling televangelist, the parable does not justify a gospel of economic prosperity. I think what Jesus is trying to tell us is that we should use everything that we've been given for the kingdom. Use all that we've been given, including our time. I know I don't do that. I don't give the Lord the time that he's due. And sometimes I feel guilty about it. I don't give him everything that I should. I may surrender some, but I'm certainly not going to surrender all. And I know that I've not been willing to take the risk that is needed to serve God. So I think this parable is about willingness as well. Willingness to give what we've been giving, including our time to God, give all to God, just as Jesus gave all of himself for us. In this parable, the master summons 3 servants, and he entrusts a certain amount to each of them. He gives one 5 talents, one 2 talents, and then one to the third servant. Then he went away. Notice that he gave the same amount to each servant. Or did not give the same amount to each servant. He gave them according to their ability. He did not ask them to do something they were unable to do. He recognized their strengths and weakness and gave them responsibility accordingly. And he didn't dictate how they were to spend the money. How they were to use the money. Instead, he gave them choices for how they were to use what he had given them. He had given them the opportunity and the resources to do what he would have them to do. Then he went away with the understanding that he would return at some time, just as Jesus did. So the 5 and 2 talent servants, they went off at once. They put the money to work, and it was doubled. They took a risk. Because it had been possible that they could have lost the whole thing, and then they would have had to face that master. So we're being told it's a risk. You need to take some risk to serve God. And if you think about it, Christianity is a risk. You run the risk of being misjudged. You run the risk of being misunderstood. You may be ostracized, laughed by others. You may lose friendships. When I became a Christian, I lost some friends. I no longer could do what they were doing. And we're going to have to take some risk to take a stand. Even though that may not be popular. We're going to have to take the risk of setting ourselves apart from the world. When we have the time, there are going to be times when we have to take the risk of speaking up when we see things that are wrong. When we see injustice. We don't have to take that risk of moving out of comfort zone. We don't have to take that risk of stretching ourselves. After a long time, the Master returns, just as Jesus will. And he calls each one of them in front of him to give him an accounting of how they had used what he had given them. To those who had taken risk, to those who had used their time wisely, he tells them that they're good and worthy servants. And he rewards each one equally, even though one gained 5 talents, the other 2. And his words to each of them were exactly the same, because they had taken risk. He judged them by their willingness to take risk. Serving God often requires. And then he gave them additional responsibility. Now they could do even more for the Master. And that's what we are to do. We are to continue to strive, continue to give, not keep things safely tucked away. Now consider the 1 talent servant. He just went out and buried what he had been given. He didn't do anything with it. The Master calls him wicked and lazy. And criticizes him because he did not even take a small risk for him. He takes what he had given him and back what he had given him, throws him out in the darkness where there was great wailing and gnashing of teeth. That's difficult. Because he did not take risk. Jesus says it this way: those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. And then when he was held accountable, this one-talent servant began to make excuses. I didn't do anything because he was afraid of his employer. He didn't do anything because his employer took advantage of people. He didn't do anything because he already had more than he needed. So why should he risk? He was just kind of content to sit on the fence where it was safe. Makes you wonder what would happen. He did away with all of our excuses. We also need to remember we don't have to do things perfectly. For grace abounds. And I read somewhere it was that grace employed abounds, but grace buried does nothing. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to have some guarantee that whatever we do is going to work. All we got to do is take the first step, and God will do the rest. There may be some difficulties, and things may not turn out as the way that we envision, but we take the risk. God will be with us. This parable is also about not wasting the time, if you will. To use the time that we've been given for the service to the Lord. You know, we often say, after this happens, I will do something different. After the kids leave, I will travel. After this happens, I will do this. We may get to that time where we haven't done those things that we promised. We may get to that time when our days are gone. And we have to remember that even though we don't like to look at it, this parable is about judgment. It's about being judged for what we did or did not do for the least of these. But if we're willing, if we take that first step, because that's all we got to do, God will do the rest. If we give of ourselves, God will be pleased, and he will say to us, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the kingdom of God. That is the word of the Lord for this day.